The sharp-tailed grouse is a medium-sized prairie grouse. It is also known as the sharptail, and is known as fire grouse or firebird by Native American Indians due to the reliance on brush fires to keep the habitat open. Taxonomy. The greater prairie chicken, lesser prairie chicken, and sharp-tailed grouse make up the genus Tympanicus, a genus of grouse found only in North America. The full scientific name of the sharp-tailed grouse is Tympanicus phasianellus. 6 extant and 1 extinct subspecies of sharp-tailed grouse have been described. T.P. phasianellus, the nominate race. So northern sharp-tailed grouse is found in Manitoba, northern Ontario, and central Quebec. It is partly migratory. T.P. Kennecott. The northwestern sharp-tailed grouse is resident from the Mackenzie River to the Great Slave Lake in the Northwest Territories of Canada. T.P. Chorus. The Alaska sharp-tailed grouse inhabits north-central Alaska eastwards to the southern Yukon, northern British Columbia, and northern Alberta. T.P. columbianus. The Columbian sharp-tailed grouse can be found in isolated pockets of native sagebrush and bunchgrass plains of Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and British Columbia. T.P. campestris. The prairie sharp-tailed grouse lives in Saskatchewan, southeastern Manitoba, southwestern Ontario, and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan to northern Minnesota and northern Wisconsin. This subspecies coexists with the plains race around the northern Red River Valley and prefers low seral stages of recently converted forests to shrubland. T.P. Jamesi. The plains sharp-tailed grouse makes its home in the northern Great Plains in southern Alberta and Saskatchewan, eastern Montana, North and South Dakota, Nebraska, and northeastern Wyoming. This race lives in the mixed grass prairie, preferring a mosaic of native grasslands, cropland, and brushy, woody riparian draws, creeks, and rivers for a winter food source above the snow cover as buds and berries. T.P. Hui. The New Mexico sharp-tailed grouse is extinct. Description. Adults have a relatively short tail with the two central feathers being square-tipped and somewhat longer than the lighter, outer tail feathers, giving the bird its distinctive name. The plumage is mottled dark and light browns against a white background. They are lighter on the underparts with a white belly uniformly covered in faint V-shaped markings. These markings distinguish sharp-tailed grouse from lesser and greater prairie chickens, which are heavily barred on their underparts. Adult males have a yellow comb over their eyes and a violet display patch on the neck. This display patch is another distinguishing characteristic from prairie chickens, as male prairie chickens have yellow or orange-colored air sacs. The female is smaller than the male and can be distinguished by the regular horizontal markings across the deck feathers as opposed to the irregular markings on the male's deck feathers, which run parallel to the feather shaft. Females also tend to have less obvious combs. Males weigh an average of 33.5 ounces and females average 29 ounces. Distribution. Sharp-tailed grouse historically occupied 8 Canadian provinces and 21 U.S. states pre-European settlement. They ranged from as far north as Alaska, south to California and New Mexico, and east to Quebec, Canada. Following European settlement, the sharp-tailed grouse has been extirpated from California, Kansas, Illinois, Iowa, Nevada, and New Mexico. Behavior. Feeding. These birds forage on the ground in summer, in trees in winter. They eat seeds, buds, berries, forbs, and leaves, also insects, especially grasshoppers, in summer. Breeding. The sharp-tailed grouse is a lekking bird species. These birds display in open areas known as leks with other males. Anywhere from a single male to upwards of 20 will occupy one lek. A lek is defined as an assembly area where animals carry on display and courtship behavior. During the spring, male sharp-tailed grouse attend these leks from March through July with peak attendance in late April, early May. These dates fluctuate from year to year based on the weather. Johnsgard observed weather-delayed lekking of up to 2 weeks by sharp-tailed grouse in North Dakota. The males display on the lek by stamping the feet rapidly, about 20 times per second, and rattle the tail feathers while turning in circles or dancing forward. Purple neck sacs are inflated and deflated during display. The males use cooing calls also to attract and compete for females. The females select the most dominant 1 or 2 males in the center of the lek, copulate, and then leave to nest and raise the young in solitary from the male. Occasionally a low-rank male may disguise himself as a female and walk to where the dominant male is and fight him. Habitat selection. The sharp-tailed grouse is found throughout different prairie ecosystems in North America. They inhabit ecosystems from the pine savannas of the east and upper Midwest to the short grass, midgrass, and shrub steppe prairies of the Great Plains and Rocky Mountain West. Selection of specific habitat characteristics and vegetation communities is variable among the different subspecies of sharp-tailed grouse. Selection of these specific habitats depends on the quality of habitat available to grouse. The major habitats used by sharp-tailed grouse recorded in the literature: a savanna-style prairie with grass is dominant and shrub patches mixed throughout, with minimal patches of trees. In fact, Hammerstrom states the taller the woody vegetation, the less of it there should be in the habitat. The savanna-style habitat is mostly preferred during the summer and brood-rearing months through autumn. This general habitat is used during all 4 seasons for different features. Habitat selection and usage vary by season, with lekking, nesting, brood-rearing, and winter habitat selected and utilized differently. Lekking habitat. The lek or dancing ground is usually made up of short, relatively flat native vegetation. Other habitat types utilized for leks are cultivated lands, recent burns, mowed sites, grazed hilltops, and wet meadows. Mansky and Barker reported sunsedge, needle and threadgrass, and blue grama on lekking grounds in the Cheyenne National Grassland in North Dakota. The males also select for upland or midland habitat type on the tops of ridges or hills. Leks surrounded by high residual vegetation were observed by Kirsch et al. They noticed lek distribution was influenced by the amount of tall residual vegetation adjacent to the lek. Lek sites eventually became abandoned if vegetation structure was allowed to get too high. The invasion of woody vegetation and trees into lekking arenas also caused displaying males to abandon leks. Moyles observed an inverse relationship of lek attendance by males with an increase in quaking aspen within 0.8 kilometers of arenas in the Alberta parklands. Berger and Badak also observed a similar trend in aspen encroachment, where 50% of leks were abandoned when aspen coverage increased to over 56% of the total area within 1 kilometer of the lek. Males select hilltops, ridges, or any place with a good field of view for leks, so they can see the surrounding displaying males approaching females to the dancing ground and predators. Nesting habitat. Nesting cover is one of the most important habitat types needed by sharp-tailed grouse hens. Nesting habitat varies widely among the different subspecies of sharp-tailed grouse. Hammerstrom Jr. found the majority of prairie sharp-tailed grouse nests occupy dense brush and woods at marsh edges. Geeson and Connolly reported that Columbian sharp-tailed grouse selected for dense shrub stands with taller, denser shrubs located at the nest site. Plains sharp-tailed grouse selected nest sites with dense residual vegetation and a shrubby component. However, nest sites are usually characterized by dense tall residual vegetation with the presence of woody vegetation either at the nest site or nearby. grouse.It state that the use of shrub-dominated habitats has not been documented by many other researchers. grouse.It found that sharp-tailed grouse hens in Alberta, Canada selected more for shrub steppe habitats in the first nest attempts because of increased concealment provided by the shrubs than the residual grass earlier in the breeding season. Rosema also found that grouse in southern Alberta selected taller, woody vegetation compared to all other habitats assessed, and grouse used this area in greater proportions to available woody habitat. These findings contradict Provincial, who states that residual vegetation is critical to sharp-tailed grouse nest success due to the early seasonal nesting nature of the grouse brood habitat. Sharp-tailed grouse are a precocial species, meaning they hatch with their eyes open, are self-reliant, and do not require the mother to feed them. Shortly after hatching, the chicks and mother leave the nest site in search of cover and food. Brood-rearing habitats of sharp-tailed grouse have many characteristics including shrubby vegetation for concealment, short vegetation nearby for feeding, and high amounts of forbs present. This could explain why sharp-tailed grouse nest in close to shrub communities. The shrub component in brooding habitat provides good canopy protection from direct sunlight and avian predators. Hammerstrom and grouse.It both observed the greatest number of sharp-tailed grouse broods present in open, rather than wooded landscapes. Both hypothesized this use of open landscape was due to an abundance of insects for the chicks and green herbaceous cover for the hen to feed on. Habitat usage by sharp-tailed grouse broods is a function of time of day, available habitat, and weather. Brood habitats are made up of many complex habitat types. Broods may utilize shrubby areas or oak grassland savanna-type habitats. Broods utilize these types of habitats for cover, while remaining close to prime foraging habitats in the form of shorter vegetation with a mixture of native vegetation. Winter habitat. Winter habitat usage by sharp-tailed grouse seems to shift toward denser cover for thermal insulation. Hammerstrom noticed that grouse use thicker edge-type habitat more than the open ground during the winter in Michigan and Wisconsin. Hammerstrom also noted that birds, when found in open habitat, were no more than a few hundred meters from thicker cover. These birds were usually utilizing grain fields. Svensson observed the same trend in Montana. Hammerstrom declared that use of forested habitat by sharp-tailed grouse vary by location, noting that sharp-tailed grouse in more semi-arid and arid areas utilize brush less frequently in winter. However, Hammerstrom did report that sharp-tailed grouse in Washington and California were observed using edge-type habitats more frequently during winter months. Mansky and Barker noticed a similar trend in winter habitat usage in North Dakota, noting that sharp-tailed grouse in small flocks joined together to form larger packs in severe weather. These packs moved from open prairie to shelter belts and adjacent croplands with standing corn and sunflowers. Habitat usage in winter varies greatly as a function of snow depth. As snow depth increases, habitat selection shifts from cropland and prairie to shelter belts and woody vegetation. One habitat change seen by Hammerstrom was grouse would select large snowbanks to burrow into to keep warm during cold nights. The use of burrows was also noted by Gratzen. Habitat fragmentation. Habitat fragmentation has been one of factors driving the decline of all subspecies of sharp-tailed grouse across its entire range throughout North America. The type of habitat fragmentation varies from ecological succession, as shrub, grassland areas transition into forested areas, fire suppression, tree plantings, limiting logging practices, and an increase of invasive woody species have also led to habitat fragmentation. The largest contributor to habitat fragmentation has been the agriculture industry. The Homestead Act 1862 opened up great expanses of virgin prairie in the West to early settlers. By 1905, about 41 million hectares of the West had been homesteaded. Much of this land was in semi-arid rangelands with submarginal precipitation to support crop production. The plowing of this land represented a permanent change in the nature of the land. Another contributor to habitat fragmentation for grouse is unmonitored and excessive cattle grazing. Cattle can be an important tool to manage habitat structure for sharp-tailed grouse when managed properly. The habitat of sharp-tailed grouse was severely affected by early settlers before cattle grazers understood the impact to the environment from overgrazing. A secondary effect of early agriculture during the years of the Dust Bowl and Great Depression in the late 1920s and early 1930s was when homesteaders abandoned the unproductive land. The United States government bought up much of this land through the Land Utilization Program, with management eventually controlled by the United States Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. During the drought years of the 1930s, these agencies revegetated some of these areas with non-native, highly competitive vegetation such as smooth brome and crested wheatgrass. These plants served the purpose by revegetating and protecting the soil, but these invaders became great competitors and directly affected native vegetation. In some instances, crested wheatgrass and smooth brome have forced out native vegetation, creating monoculture habitats. Monoculture habitats are not favored by sharp-tailed grouse, as they prefer sites with high heterogeneity. Hammerstrom was quoted as saying, "More important than the individual cover plants is the fact that most of the nests of all species were in cover mixtures rather than pure stands." Habitat assessment. Research conducted pre-1950 on sharp-tailed grouse habitat assessment was done visually. Hammerstrom reported sparse vegetation was seldom selected for nesting due to lack of adequate cover. Habitat generalizations were formed based on the number of individuals found at a given local. These assumptions were, if more birds were present at one location and less at another, then the first must be the better habitat. Hammerstrom observed 119 of 207 grouse broods frequenting savanna-style habitat. He concluded that the savanna-style habitat was the habitat needed for best management. As the research on habitat for grouse species matured, so did the techniques used for assessment. Cover boards and robel poles were developed to measure visual obstruction and create habitat indices. Cover boards were developed as early as 1938 by White to study white-tailed deer habitat. White's cover board was 6 feet in height, marked and numbered every foot. Visible marks were counted to measure obstruction by plants. Cobridger developed a 4x4 footboard marked at 3-inch intervals with alternating white and black squares. He placed a camera in the center of the breeding ground at a height of 3 feet. He then placed the coverboard 30 feet away, taking photographs of the coverboard. After compiling all the photographs, they were analyzed with a hand lens to assess the number of squares visible. This number gave him a vegetation index of cover classes. This method has recently been modified by Lim et al. Instead of taking photographs 30 feet away like Cobridger, Lim et al. Took photographs of vegetation backdropped by a 1 by 1 meter cover board at a height of 1 meter, 4 meters away. These digital photographs were uploaded to Adobe Acrobat and digitized to the 1 by 1 meter backdrop. Roble et al. Developed a pole to determine height based on correlated vegetation weight. The pole was duly named the Roble pole. Roble et al. Found that VO measurements taken at a height of 1 meter and a distance of 4 meters from the pole gave a reliable index of the amount of vegetation production at a location. Hammerstrom et al. Were quoted as saying height and density of grass were clearly more important to the prairie chickens than species composition, as reported by Roble et al. This was also believed to be true for the sharp-tailed grouse. These key aspects can now be assessed using the Roble pole, Nuts coverboard, and Lim et al. Digital photography method effectively and efficiently. Management. It is apparent that the effects of habitat fragmentation across all habitat types selected by sharp-tailed grouse are impacting this species. The management of sharp-tailed grouse habitat has changed over the years from observational to more hands-on approach. The management of lekking habitat and winter habitat are not as clearly defined in the literature as nesting and brood-rearing habitat assessment and management. The development of the Roble pole and coverboards has become a key tool in habitat assessment, providing land managers a means to inventory and study habitat preferences based on vegetation structure and density. The Roble pole has become the more favored of the two methods in recent years for habitat assessment. The United States Forest Service uses visual obstruction readings to set stocking densities for cattle based on the current year's standing residual vegetation. This method is currently conducted on the USFS Little Missouri Grasslands, Cheyenne National Grasslands, Cedar River National Grassland, and Grand River National Grassland, all found in the Dakota Prairie National Grasslands in North and South Dakota. 2001. The Roble pole is a non-destructive method for inventorying vegetative biomass. This method was used to create a habitat suitability index based on vegetation visual obstruction, ranging from 0 to 30.5 centimeters with a suitability index rating of 0 to 1.0. Studies of nesting habitat by Prose et al. In the Nebraska Sandhills found that nesting sharp-tailed grouse selected nest sites with visual obstruction readings of more than 4 centimeters. Similarly, Clausen and Rotila observed that 58% of nests in southwestern Montana were located in sites with an average VOR of 24 centimeters. The other nests in this study were located in sites with VORs of 11 to 18 centimeters. Reese et al. Observed that sites with a VO of less than 5 centimeters near possible nesting locations indicated a decline in quality nesting habitat as average VO declined. The use of the Roble pole to assess habitat for sharp-tailed grouse has given managers a target height of vegetation structure to have at the end of the grazing season. This allows managers to set the appropriate stocking rate to best attain a desired vegetation height. As a rule of thumb, the average VOR reading for suitable grouse nesting habitat is 3.5 inches. Lekking habitat can be managed by burning, mowing, clear-cutting, and grazing across the entire range of the sharp-tailed grouse subspecies. Amin found that leks that contained woody vegetation did not exceed 30% of the total lek area. Similarly, Moyles found a negative correlation with increased in aspen trees on lekking sites and the number of displaying males present. Trees may provide perches for avian predators, but further work needs to be done on the effects of tree encroachment. In art, John James Audubon illustrates the sharp-tailed grouse Tetraophasia nellis as Plate 382 in Birds of America, published London, 1827–38. The original watercolor by Audubon, from which this print was engraved by Robert Havell in 1837, shows the two grouse separated. However, the constraints of Audubon's wish have the bird's illustrated life size and the maximum page size forced Havell to overlap the birds in the final print. The original watercolor is owned by the New York History Society. Provincial bird. The sharp-tailed grouse is the provincial bird of Saskatchewan. Status and conservation. These birds are declining in numbers and range due to habitat loss, but overall they are not considered a threatened species.